Well, recently we've been talking a lot about smart speakers, and you have to wonder, with me being the Apple sheep and all these new smart speakers coming out, how can I be more biased? How is that even possible with the HomePod not even out yet? Well, I have a couple theories and I have a couple of predictions as well as a couple of wishes. Not entirely sure how much of them will come true, probably none of them, but still, I think it's worth talking about, so let's talk about it. So as you all know, last month in November, Apple sadly delayed the HomePod to some unknown date in early 2018. My prediction is March, because Apple rarely introduces products in the January-February phase sometimes. But with a brand new product lineup like a smart speaker, that is the HomePod, usually that's something they reserve for a complete website relaunch, or maybe even a keynote with the iPhone SE2, AirPower, new AirPods charger, perhaps a new iPhone 10 color. There's plenty of things that are stacking up for the next keynote that I don't think will necessarily be Worldwide Developers Conference, but regardless, a lot of people have asked the question, why has it been delayed? Like, MKBHD has often made the joke, like, how hard is it to make a Siri speaker? Because Siri's not that smart, right? Well, my prediction is that it's not necessarily the hardware that is the problem. For those of you who didn't know, when you're sending out a product, you're usually trying your hardest to get the latest software updates into it so that it is fully functional and capable when it's unboxed. And I mean, just look at the history of Apple with music, revolutionizing the industry with iPod and iTunes, and now leading the wireless headphone industry with AirPods, one of the most popular wireless headphones ever. People love these things. Why are they so behind on this new craze that Amazon and Google are very much enjoying? All of the new revenue they're breaking into with the Google Home Mini and the Google Home Max, and of course Amazon's infinite number of growing speakers with Alexa. What is holding Apple back right now? I do not think it is the hardware themselves. I mean, speakers themselves, it's not like Face ID where they were developing some new, completely redesigned take on face unlocking that required these dot projectors and these infrared scanners that all had to fit into this tiny space in the notch on the iPhone 10. No, these are just speakers, subwoofers, tweeters, microphones. These are all things that Apple's been designing on devices for years. In fact, I really love the speakers on my MacBook Pro. They sound incredibly bassy. Oh wait, you hate that word from the last video. Sorry, can't say bassy. They sound incredibly rich in bass for a device that's that thin. The iPad Pro I use gets incredibly loud, and my iPhone 10 has stereo speakers, which also get very loud for a smartphone of that size. And it's rumored that on the iMac Pro, there's redesigned speakers set up that make it even louder than the current 5K iMacs. So it's not like Apple hasn't messed with the speaker department before, and that's why my theory is, for the reasoning of the HomePod Delay, it's more about better integrating Siri to compete with the Google Assistant and Alexa better. Perhaps the manufacturing process of the HomePod has already been figured out and it's not that complicated. I mean, they let you look inside the HomePod on the website. It doesn't look very complicated. Big subwoofer in the middle, surrounded by all these tweeters and all these microphones, so that hopefully Siri will be able to hear you from very far away. And of course, it'll fill the room with that rich sound. I don't see what the complicated part of engineering it is. I think what's causing the delay is the fact that they want to make sure Siri, now being one of the core features of a device, whereas Siri on many other devices are just kind of an add-on. We all know that Siri can do some things pretty well, but compared to the Google Assistant, she can be a lot slower, she can be a lot dumber, and probably Alexa as well. So this time they're trying to make sure that when they're designing Siri into this device that will hopefully be able to hear you from 20 plus feet away, just as good as the Google devices do it, it has to be done right. She has to be smart, she has to be capable, and they don't want to send them out early and have a inferior Siri embedded within this smart speaker and then tell everyone, wait, you have to fill out all these software updates first. I believe that was one of the main reasons the iPhone 10 had to be delayed, was because there were so many changes to the operating system to fit this new aspect ratio and to fit the notch at the top. Like, that probably slowed them down almost just as much as the manufacturing. So of course I have no evidence for this. There's no articles confirming this, but that's just my theory as to why it's being delayed. While a lot of people are curious, like, it's just a Siri speaker, how hard is it to make? It's because they want to extinguish that doubt in Siri that so many journalists have right now. When people look at Siri and say, no, she's dumb, she's stupid, you should just get the Google Assistant. If Siri is done correctly, and keep in mind that Apple, compared to other companies, definitely rolls out a lot more software updates than usual. Think of how much your iPhones change over the years with iOS updates. So applying that logic to the HomePod, software and improvements are going to be fairly routine on this device compared to Google products, which, they get updates, but for the most part, they're pretty minor. There's a couple of distinct advantages the HomePod could have over the Google Home ecosystem that they wouldn't even be able to touch. So as of right now, I have several Google Home Minis in all the office and at home. I've got the Google Home Max, and it all works pretty well with my Apple ecosystem. I have the Google Home app on my phone. I can control it that way. I can set up Google devices on my iOS devices. I can control them from my iPad even. So like having Google products cooperate with my Apple devices is not very complicated. Works just fine. However, if we have the Siri integration in the HomePod, this means that you could even start sending iMessage texts over the HomePod. Like, hey Siri, send messages to this person, start a FaceTime audio call with this person. That integration, because of that Apple exclusivity that's under the Apple ecosystem dome, that's something that the Google Home products would definitely have a hard time with because Apple is definitely not going to let them into that part of the iOS device. Whereas the HomePod definitely would have that advantage. The HomePod would also probably have a setup advantage, whereas, you know, right now, if I want to set up a Google Home Max or Google Home Mini, I have to download the Google Home app, connect it to a Wi-Fi network, tell it my address, set up the Hello Google feature on my phone, and then have it transfer over to the Mini. Like, there's a bit more of a disconnect because these companies are really kind of rivaling each other, and yet they're still working together with this app. Whereas the HomePod will likely set up and pair just like a simple Apple Watch, you know, or AirPods. Little pop-up with a W1 chip kind of look to it, and you just hit set up, and it knows your Apple ID. You don't have to sign in. Knows your Apple Music library, knows your radio stations, knows the podcasts you follow. Because while Google has Google Play Music and YouTube, which I do think is one distinct advantage to the Google Home ecosystem, Apple has the Podcasts app in Apple Music, which is, I believe, a tad more popular. You know, usually it's Spotify versus Apple Music. Google Play Music is just kind of there, but still, there's definitely those exclusives the HomePod will have that the other devices won't. I think definitely something Siri could work on is being more of a book smart thing, because as we see with other tech journalists, they love to just ask their Google devices random questions and be like, oh wow, it does know that. I don't really complain much about that. I'm not a terribly AI and smart speaker focused guy. I've been reviewing a lot of them, but I have to say that the smartness has never been convenient to me. I'm never just sitting around going to ask my device, how tall are you? Or who's the president? Or change your voice. Like, these are all things that are not functional to me. It's just toy-like. But if they really want to get people excited about the HomePod and that heftier price tag compared to the regular Google Home or the Amazon Alexa, they kind of have to make Siri more of a competitor. And that gives me into my final point as we're wrapping up this video, is I think that in 2018, with the Worldwide Developers Conference in the summer, and then hopefully, and by hopefully, I mean obviously, the iPhone 10 Plus unveiling in September, in one of those two keynotes, they could actually start unveiling other hardware speakers. Because I think that most of the delays right now are based on the Siri improvements and not really the hardware of the HomePod, just making sure the software on it is perfected. I think that means that once they got Siri figured out, both in the summer and then later in the fall, they can start introducing a more diverse lineup of smart speakers. I think that Google has really hit it right. I don't think they get demonetization right. I don't think they get YouTube right. And I don't think they get smartphones, tablets, or laptops right. But one thing I'm very impressed with by Google is their Home Mini being so cheap and being so excitable to all these different people who are really interested in it, making it available to everyone, and also by making the Google Home Max a speaker that's completely overkill, way louder than you need to be, but sounds amazing. And with those three Google Home devices that they've unveiled, they have a pretty solid base of speakers that people can choose from. You know, I personally think that they need something right in between Google Home and Google Home Max that's loud and good sounding, but also not like window shattering. The Max, I believe, is a little overkill, probably for most living rooms. That's where I'm thinking the HomePod is gonna fit perfectly. It's not going to be rock the house kind of loud, but it's definitely going to be rich, and the people who heard the HomePod at the Worldwide Developers Conference mentioned that it sounded really, really crisp compared to the other speakers they were comparing it to there. However, that the bass was not, you know, heart pounding. It was not ear-burstingly loud, but still was a focus on quality, and that definitely sounds like Apple. I think it'd be really great if Apple worked on a HomePod Mini that would not be in the same price range of the Home Mini. I think that's a little too cheap, and the sound quality is not very good at all. That Apple would likely make a HomePod Mini that's around $100, maybe a bit larger than a Home Mini, but definitely sound a lot better, more omnidirectional than just a speaker that shoots straight up in the air. And then maybe even work on a HomePod Pro that is specifically built for professionals. And while it would be more expensive, more like the $500, $600 range, it could compete closer to that with the Google Home Max and be heavy duty, overkill, and good use for professionals, just like the Home Max is now. I would love to see that next year. Again, there's no reports of that. This is just my wish list and predictions as to why the HomePod is being delayed. And I hope, similar to AirPods, it's being delayed for a good reason, as in they want to make sure they do it right. And while it sucks that we have to wait, and it sucks that we can't get HomePods for the holidays, I think the wait is going to be worth it because Apple likes to perfect things, and this, they want to make sure is done right. Let me know all your thoughts on the HomePod, or maybe my ideas of HomePod Mini and Pro in the future. All that good stuff in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.